As Benjamin Franklin once said.
Are warrantless wiretaps, I mean, was that a good thing after 9/11?
I don't necessarily believe that warrantless wiretapping was a good thing. Judge Richard Posner once said that FISA, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, wasn't necessarily effective for detecting new terrorists. It was all it was good for was monitoring the ones we have known. So I don't believe that warrantless wiretapping is an effective deterrent for the new wave of terrorists.
What does the word search mean in the constitutional sense?
Intrusion into privacy. In that sort of sense, the Constitution used the word security instead of privacy.
With respect to aerial surveillance, are you familiar with the doctrine of open view?
Yes.
What does the doctrine of open view say?
Well, basically, if you can still see it, in Florida v. Riley, the police were flying with a helicopter at an altitude of 400 feet, and they could see through the broken roof of Riley's greenhouse that he was indeed growing marijuana. And the majority opinion stated that he did not have an expectation of privacy because even somebody from outdoors could still see it. It wasn't exactly invasive, thermal imaging or X-ray vision.
But
What about satellite surveillance? The same principles apply?
well, in that case of Florida v. Riley, they talk about how it's visible, anybody can see the outside of the home. But in O'Connor's dissent in that case, she explained that not everybody just flies around in a helicopter. And I think with the satellite, that would be kind of the same thing. Everyone doesn't have access to a satellite. And so I don't think that, the court, I personally don't think that should be protected because all individuals could not view it from a satellite.
I think
Well, just briefly, that was O'Connor's concurrence in Justice Brennan's dissent in Florida v. Riley.
And I think that with regard to satellites, I think that despite this open view doctrine, you can't apply that necessarily, like Maddie said, to aerial views because not only I think that the open view doctrine refers mostly to what the average individual, so like walking on the side of the street, can see because, like she said, you can't have this clear image from a satellite like open to the public.
What about cell phone use?
Well, actually, recently there's a case in the Supreme Court right now, City of Ontario v. Kwan, where they're talking about text messaging. A police officer was using his phone for inappropriate use, and they were wondering why he was going over on his bill plan. And so their court is questioning whether the police officials have the right to go through his text messages or if he has the right to privacy in that situation.
And do you agree with that or disagree?
Well, I agree that text messaging and email should receive the same amount of protection as do, say, a telephone call. Jeffrey Toobin once said that the standards for an employer for, listening into somebody's telephone is vastly different than he can sift through somebody's emails or text messaging. And because we live in a new digital age where that stuff is almost everywhere, it's commonplace, everybody uses it, then they should receive some level of privacy equivalent to that of using the cell phone as just a basic telephone.
But I agree with Johnny, but I think that it changes drastically when you're talking about in the workplace. Because this was a work-provided pager or work-provided phone that he was using. So I think that it changes because it's not his personal.
So are you talking about governmental intrusion there, or are you talking about private enterprise intrusion?
Well, see, in her case, as she mentioned, this was a city-issued pager. So at the point where these city officials had I believe they had the authority to look into what he was paging to these other people because they were the ones who issued him the pager and they were the ones who have the right to search through these private messages.
So had the officer then expressly or impliedly consented to the city's search of his cell phone?
He did not because, he filed suit because he claimed that not only were his rights violated, but the rights of the people to whom he was paging, because he did not think that the city had the authority to go look through what he said were his private messages.
However, the city has said that they had a compelling state interest because he was a public official. The cell phone and the overcharges were being paid with tax dollars. So because they were using the people's money to pay for what was considered, personal messaging to his wife and the person he was having an extramarital affair with, there was indeed an interest to regulate and to look through and see what the officer was doing.
So if he had paid those charges himself, then there wouldn't have been a right for the city to look at those charges?
He actually did pay for, I believe he did pay for the charges himself, but the fact was that, I don't think the question really is like who pays the charges. I think the fact is that he's mainly concerned with the fact that the police looked, or the state looked into these private messages.
Well, was it just in the context that they were looking for the messages or content?
Well, not necessarily. The city found that he was going over the limit.
Okay, but where do you draw that line? I mean, does the city have a right to go and see exactly what he was talking about, or does it just, okay, this is a private call, this is a public call?
I believe in this case that the city did have the right to do this. I believe that if he wanted to send these messages out to these people, he could have done so on his own private cell phone, where we would have a much greater degree of privacy. But the fact that this was a public state-issued pager drew that distinction.